Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing great. We got a beautiful day today. No bad weather out there. So thank you for joining me. We're studying international channels, and I kind of wanted to give you, while we're at it, I think if anybody has heard about this disaster in the Suez Canal, I think probably you might be a little bit curious about it. So what I was going to do was I was going to give you a slideshow to give you an idea of just some of this. It's amazing the amount of traffic that goes on overseas. And on Thursday, I'll show you a live map of all of the ships that are around the world. But this thing in the Evergreen is really fascinating because it just shows you in many ways the fragility of our channel system, okay? And I mean that both in the literal sense in terms of the Suez Canal and in the figurative sense when we talk about marketing channels in general. So let me just load up this little slideshow I've got here for you. And I'm gonna go through this, and I want you to understand this and appreciate it because I think it is something that will add to your overall knowledge to try to help you understand just the size of the world economy and the amount of depth that we have in terms of all of the ships. And like I said, also the fragility of this as well. And so I put together a little slideshow here on the Ever Given. It's actually 2 words. So I just thought of the Ever Freaking Nightmare. And this is like an Ever Freaking Nightmare, definitely. So let's talk about the basics of ships. Now, first off, to give you an idea, it's something that's important to understand is that ships actually, if you want to think about it, are locked into the oceans in which they serve in. The Panama Canal, up until a couple of years ago, was limited to the vessels that they could go through. As a matter of fact, shipbuilders had to build ships exactly for the size of the Panama Canal, and they were known as the Panaflex, all right? If a ship was what's known as the Panaflex, it could make it all the way through. And that is because the Panama Canal is a series of locks in the way that it was built. They did not have the sizes to traverse through the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, if you will, into the Pacific Ocean. The Suez Canal is much different. The Suez Canal is over 150 years old. It traverses between the Mediterranean Sea and then ultimately out into the Indian Ocean. And there isn't the great amount of differences in size and in depth. However, it does has its own limitations as well as any man-made canal system would be. So let me kind of give you an idea of what the ships are that we have that go in those areas. And the first is to understand that the world is ruled by what we call container ships. Now, before the mid to early 30s, the way that you loaded cargo on a ship was, unlike sizes would be on pallets and other things that you would try to fill up the holes with. There was a gentleman in the 30s, what was his name? It was something like Knight or something like that. I can't remember his name, but he came up with the idea of being able to simply take containers or trucks and put the trucks on the ships. They actually had a version where you could put railroad cars on them, and they were called Sealand. And so you could actually take a railroad car, load it on a ship. They had specially built rails for the ships, and then they could be shipped overseas, and you took the rail cars and you just put them right on the rails. And so that was the type of transportation that they had at that time, intermodal. In the 40s and 50s, you started to see what were known as intramodal containers, and it used a qualification that was called TEU, which means a 20-foot equivalent unit, okay? And this was kind of the standard way that you would measure these, was in these 20-foot containers, And usually what you had is either these 20-foot containers or 40-foot containers as a standardization as to how you load ships. And so when you look at a container ship, if you look this over on the right-hand side of the slide there, this is an average container ship. Look at all of those on there. If you've never seen them before, it's an amazing thing to look at. And the thought that you always thought about is, why don't they tip over? Well, they tip over, believe it or not, okay? So if you read down in the middle third bullet point, 9% of all non-bulk cargo worldwide is transported by container ships, and the largest modern container ships can carry over 23,000 TEUs. So you see those containers that are on that big vessel? 23,000 of those on a single vessel, okay? It's mind-boggling to think about it, okay? And so when you see TEU, folks, and you go into supply chain and you see the concept of TEU, that's what it means. So this is, I don't know if you've actually ever been to the Port of Savannah, Georgia. It's a great place to go enjoy a spring break or whatever, folks. But when you go to Savannah, Georgia, it's got one of the largest container, it is the largest container port on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And so the Port of Savannah, Georgia, this is actually the giant cranes that they have here. This is the actual channel in Savannah. In 2020, in a downturn, it moved 4.6 million of those TEUs. So think of that. And they're talking about right now doing intermodal transport. The Port of Savannah is setting up with rail to be able to move 1 million TEUs in a given year. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to think about, okay? So anyway, if you go to Savannah and you're in that direction or you're going for any reason, you just drive over the big bridge, folks. It's just amazing to look at, okay? So if we're looking at classifications of ships, we have some ships, if you look at them, they go from smaller to bigger. So around 1,000 of those units, the feeder ships. Now the Panamax vessels, as I said, the Panamax are those vessels that can safely traverse the Panama Canal. And so you can load them on the eastern seaboard of the US, or you could load them in cargoes like in Europe, and they could pass through the Panama Canal and go in the other direction, okay? Post-Panama Panamax vessels are actually those that can use the new Panama Canal, which is sufficiently or substantially wider. They added to the Panama Canal and tripled the amount of capacity, okay? That's the new post-Panamax and the new Panamax. The ultra-large containers, these are the vessels that are the size of the ship that got stuck, okay? So, this is the Golden class container ship. This is actually the sizes that are the vessel that is in the canal or was in the canal now. They are, I want you to put this in your head, 1,300 feet long. All right, that's nearly 1/5 of a mile. It is the size of super tankers that are out on the open seas that transport oil. That gives you an idea of their capacities and sizes in terms of how many TEUs they can carry, and also their width as well. You can just see how they're stacked, you know, from stem to stern. It's just amazing. And finally, this is the vessel, fully stacked. This is the Ever Given, okay? So the Ever Given, that 220,000, that's gross metric tons, okay? So that's how much it weighs before you put anything on it, okay? So it's 1,300 feet in length. It's 192 feet wide, okay? That's what the beam means. The drop means how deep it goes. Now, okay, I'm a marketing strategist guy, and I've also worked offshore, and I worked on tugboats and those kind of things. And when I look at the propulsion, I'm getting alarm bells go off in my head because it has what are called bow thrusters. And a bow thruster is basically a propeller that goes sideways that allows you to move the ship this way. Well, bow thrusters are good, but most vessels also have what are known as stern thrusters. And so you have those same kind of things at the back of the ship to give big ships mobility. And I was looking at that and I was going, that's, you know, I mean, that's a limitation, okay? And yes, with all of that, you've only got a crew of 25 on a ship like that. So yeah, look how stacked that thing is. So the Ever Given gets stuck. And so these are pictures of it. This is a picture on the front. There's a pictures on the from the satellite and a picture from where it was. There were 360 vessels that were basically stuck there that couldn't get out of the way of each other. And there's ships pouring through to the Suez Canal 24 hours a day. They said that in terms of total cost, it was something to the effect of $800 million a day in lost shipping. So calculate it out, it was a week, okay? So you're talking about $5.6 billion, something to that effect of lost revenue. So what happened, okay? So how did it happen? So what happened was this, okay? I was just looking at an exact discussion of this. And so what happened is that the vessel comes through the Suez Canal and you have what's called the wake effect or the rear effect. What happens is there's a high pressure cell on the bow and there's a negative pressure cell on the stern. And so what happens is that the banks tend to push the bow away from the banks, and the churn on the back of the propeller causes a negative effect, which makes it swing towards the bank, and so you have this thing going on. And so what happened is that the vessel was going 13 knots, and it swung left, missed the bank, and then swung right into the bank, the east bank of the Suez Canal. And so this is what you see, it's stuck there, all right? And so it finally got free yesterday. And, you know, I tried to kind of grasp what could the problems have been, and I tried to think about them, and I needed an expert. I really needed an expert to work on this. And so when I need an expert on shipping, I call him my dad, okay? My dad is this guy right here. His name is Harvey Shows. He was a captain. He was what's called a master. He had what I call a terminal degree. So if you ever go into Merchant Marines, on a Merchant Marine card, one of the things that the card has is it has your limitations. So it'll say, Captain, limited to a 100-ton vessel, limited to the navigable waters of the Gulf of Mexico and to the Chapala Basin. It'll say something like that. Dad's Merchant Marine card says, ship's master, unlimited tonnage, unlimited waters. So Dad was a Mississippi River pilot for 20 years. He was a Tampa pilot for another 5. He took the Iwo Jima, which was the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier into New Orleans. He's done a submarine. He's driven a super tanker. That's my favorite picture of Dad over here on the right. That's him on the sail of the submarine. He's got his walkie-talkie in one hand. He's got a cigar in the other. And he's got a mustache. You know, he's just badass. Okay. Just looks the part, okay? Whenever I see that, in his life, I never liked that mustache. So now he finally grew one. So anyway, it's a lot. So I talked to Dad about it, and I kind of talked to him about what happened. And so this is what happened. The first off is that there were 40-mile-an-hour crosswinds that were blowing from east to west across the Suez Canal. There was a desert storm also at the same time, and it reduced visibility. And the Ever Given, all 3 things together, was going 13 knots. Now, I want you to think of the potential energy or excuse me, the kinetic energy of a vessel 220,000 metric tons dry, okay, moving at 13 knots, and think about the impossibility of trying to stop that. And so Dad's, one of his favorite sayings is the worst problems captains get into is getting in a hurry. If you ever see those YouTube videos where the captain will spin a ship around and land it on, he hates that, okay? You know, he's repeated it to me more than anything else over and over again. The captain is responsible for the lives of his crew and the safety of the vessel he serves. He says that over and over again. And this is probably what happened, all right? Now, let me also say this, okay? There's a couple of things that are going on here. And when Dad and I talked about it, the first thing he said is it's captain error, pilot error, gotta be. And so here's some of the things that have exacerbated the problem, folks. I saw this 6 months ago and I told my channels class, this is gonna come back and bite them. And here we are 6 months later. The first thing that's happened is that shipping companies have been actually selling their ships in order to get cash. They've been selling their inventory for scrap prices. In other words, selling them to be scrapped. And what they're hoping to do is after the pandemic is over, be able to build vessels. And usually what that also means is that they're selling the smaller vessels as well. The vessels that don't have 20,000, TEUs. They're the ones that have 1,000 or 1,500, all right? So that's one of the things that happened. And when you do that, in essence, I want you to think in terms of channels, you limit your ability to be able to go to very specific ports. It means also that instead of the Port of New York or the Port of Norfolk, Virginia, that you're limiting yourself to places like Savannah, Rotterdam, those places that only have container ships, okay? So what that also means is, think about it, if you've got nothing but container ships going on, it means that you're focusing concentration in a greater amount of area for a limited number of types of ships. The second thing that's happened, and I also noted this 6 months ago, is that crews are being overworked, okay? So what's happened with the pandemic, by union laws, the ship or our crews are supposed to have 2 months off of every year. Now you think that's a lot of time, but folks, when you're on a merchant vessel, you're on the vessel 24 hours a day, all right? And there are crews that have been on there for a year now, and they have had no relief. And these are just 3 of the articles that I looked up and I found. Crews are just exhausted at the edges of their limits. And I certainly think this has contributed to this. And then finally, I had this very interesting quote that I found in the International Maritime Organization's, their trade journal. Seafarers cannot remain at sea indefinitely. This was in September, all right? So talk about being prophetic. In addition to the humanitarian crisis, the safety issues that arise from requiring overly fatigued and mentally exhausted seafarers to continue operating vessels are a matter of great concern. And I also saw I did not post it here, but I saw a survey by seafarers that said they expect within a year some sort of major kind of catastrophe. And sure enough, it happened, okay? And so what is kind of the conclusion of all of this? Well, there was this need to rely on larger vessels to move materials versus the Panamax vessels is one of the things that kind of created this issue, okay? You're having overworked crews, too much seat time, needing relief. And you also have this concept of go fever, okay? Getting their itis. It's been called many things. But the fact is that you're trying to get to a place, into a different location when the conditions are not right, all right? There was a mistake by the captain. He was moving too fast and the conditions have reduced the number of options. And what you finally had is limited solutions. You had no exit strategy in an overcrowded environment. And then the last thing, Dad has talked about this for a decade, the real lack of seamanship, okay, that you find once we have started to go through automation. And my dad has lived through automation from being on the vessels in the 40s to finally, I think 2000 was the last time he was on a major commercial vessel. He's watched the whole, gamut of things happen. And what he's seen is the overconfidence in technology to get you out of a jam. And what you find is the lack of learning the art of being able to steer a vessel. And this also goes to planes, by the way. The Air France Flight 400 that was lost over the Atlantic Ocean basically became the autopilot turned off in the middle of a storm, and the crew just simply recovered. And the Navy, the United States Navy, has also talked about this on several of the accidents that if you've seen the news over the last decade, you've seen that these things have happened and have created their own disasters as well, is that there's less concern on understanding your vessels and how to get the most out of yourself and your crew versus having the vessels do that for you. So you might see a bonus question on that. But I thought that, if you wanted to talk to your friends intelligently, I wanted to kind of talk, and this is something that interests me, and it definitely interests when you're talking about international, channels and what this has done. It's been a horrible effect. Like I said, we're talking about $5.6 billion in losses. Now just think about that. They cut up these ships because they wanted to save pennies and not have to pay crews to stay on those ships to take care of them versus, the rod and those kind of things. And ultimately what they did was it contributed to a disaster in one way or another.
I'm following this story pretty closely also, because I just think that it was pretty interesting. And I heard some theories that there's actually a lot of corruption in that part of the world along the Suez Canal. And like the people who make the ships go through the canal, they take a lot of bribes, and maybe like the captain of the ship refused, and also other people were saying that they've had worse winds and they've had bigger ships and all these things, and nothing like this has ever happened before. So I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
I was going to take the high road, but yeah, you're correct. My dad has dealt with that. My dad's been through the Suez Canal half a dozen times. And yes, I've heard that. I mean, you won't see any of that, you're making a very good, you won't see that in the official discussion about it. But yeah, have there been ships that have been crashed deliberately? Yeah. I mean, let's just say I'll wait for the Admiralty boards to make their final kind of judgment. You may not see that, but what I would look for is I would look for a failure in communication. If you see anything that says that, then you're right on the button. I think that's a very good observation. I shouldn't take it out. But yeah, I mean, corruption is one of those things that every sea person deals with, and many cultures deal with it in different ways. And the most obvious way is you simply pay them, all right? I will tell you this, I would like to see whether or not that pilot gets his license yanked. I don't know if they will, Yeah, good point. I'm not going to say no, because I can believe it. My dad used to have, he was third mate, and he was also a bosun, which means they take care of the operations. And he used to regularly have, a duffel bag of cartons of cigarettes ready, just in case he had to. Because there's been more than one time that he's had to throw a duffel bag overboard to be able to get out of a port, especially Alexandria. Yeah. Yeah, Rotterdam, you don't find that stuff. You don't find it in Europe. And I don't want to say anything more than that, but certainly you used to be that way in Australia, not anymore. Definitely that way in Hong Kong, not in South Korea. It just depends on where you go. But yes, you deal with it. And and realize this, that's culturally based. And the difference between, by the way, folks, morality and ethics is that morality is culturally based, and where something may be moral in a given culture, whether or not it's ethical is in a different relationship. It's why there's so many difficulties in China when it comes to property rights, okay? Because in a cultural sense, it is not part of it. It's like trying to explain sound to someone who can't hear. It's just not part of their structure in life. And also to go along with that is, in the very same token, the thought that I would have to give something or bribe someone in order to get an honest day's work, it's bizarre and strange. I'll give you another example. My wife, Dr. Albinson, she doesn't understand why I give tips. And that's because it's a European culture. They don't do tips. And for me, it's just a matter of doing business. If you want to go to New Orleans and you want to make sure your car is parked right, you make sure you slip the parking person the 10. I mean, it's just that way. I don't disagree. Okay? Good point. Yeah, they freed it, by the way. It's going to be kind of interesting. This is a crew. It's a crew from India that hasn't been off the vessel in 10 months. I don't know about the pilot, of these things. When my dad, as a river pilot, had to go back to radar school every 6 months. And if he failed radar school, he lost his license. And that's in the United States. That's the maritime rules here. I don't know, okay? And yet, driving a vessel at 13 knots into the side of a bank, I don't know, okay? But I kind of wonder if they know exactly. I don't know. Boy, you got me thinking now. I'm gonna do some research on that. Thanks for the question. Any other questions on that, by the way? Anybody else would like to say something? It's really fascinating, and I totally agree with you. I'm onto the subject, and there's a guy on YouTube called Bancalorio who does all of the who does the airline investigations when there's a accident or whatever, and he did this one on vessels, and it fascinated me. He has a really good understanding of ships and those kind of things. So if you're into that stuff, there's lots of good YouTubes on it. Okay, so without further ado, let us move on to chapter 9 and talk about channels in an international environment. Okay. So, just to go over some basics, channels internationally, we may be in what I would consider to be one of the most amazing and expansive times in world trade ever. If any of you get the chance to work, in channels or trade in any way, I think it's a fascinating field to be in, especially for young people right now. We're at the point where the world is really starting to shrink and expand at the same time. So initially what you had what was known as the triad. And the triad actually, in terms of trading, was North America, which included US and Canada, Western Europe and Japan. And they were considered initially to be what were considered the real viable markets in the world. And of course, you did have some exceptions to those pockets of influence in the Middle East, especially, of course, in the OPEC nations where the enormous amount of money was available. But what you had also in the 40s and after World War II was countries coming out of the concept of colonialism. And so much of Africa literally was owned by multiple nations. And so Great Britain owned, in effect, the economic output of India and Indonesia in around that area. The products, the rubber, and all of those other things that came from those, in essence, were used by Great Britain. In Africa, you found Belgium owned much of the Congo. You found France owned areas there. And right after World War II, as I said, you saw those countries leaving, and you started to see the end of colonialism as a concept. And you started to see them moving from socialist kinds of economics to self-sufficiency and more of a capitalist environment, even if they call themselves socialist economies as well. Capitalism, in essence, is the grease that gets things moving, okay? You also found one of the difficulties during this time before this era were in convertible currencies. And so what that basically meant is that if you were going to do international business, you had difficulty converting or repatriating your money, okay? And so think of it that way. And so if I were a United States firm and I wished to be able to build a plant overseas, there were enormous resistances or enormous difficulties in converting those currencies to US dollars and moving them back and forth. And of course, those days are long gone. I mean, long gone, even now to the point where you have cryptocurrencies, which are not attached to any nationality whatsoever. And it's really, really hard for me to put my mind around that, but it does exist. And so what you found is you had the burgeoning growth in the 50s and 60s of new markets, most notably noted as what were known as the East Asian tigers. And I'm not just talking about Japan, because Japan, of course, is the largest of the dragons that are out there, but I'm also talking about Taiwan. We're talking about Formosa, talking about South Korea. I've been to South Korea. I had a wonderful 7 weeks there. I taught there, and they're wonderful people. I mean, it was a great, great trip. And you can see they just have one of those really great growing economies in a country that's about the size of New Jersey. Okay. You also find that the fertility rates are growing in those areas. You found that there's a greater openness towards trade in that time. These large young populations, all of these things are making it natural for trade to start to grow. Now, if we're to take a glance right now of economies where they are, the US in terms of GDP is perhaps the largest, well, it's not perhaps, it is. It's the largest economy GDP-wise, gross domestic product. It's something in the effect of 22 trillion. China is next with around 13 to 14 trillion. Now, let me also say this about the United States. There's also what's known as the underground economy. And the underground economy is not what you might think. It's not drugs or any of the other things. Is that there's an enormous amount of the American economy which is cash only, all right? And so the cash only economy, the economy that we never see or talk about in the United States, is about 11 to 12% the size of the United States economy. So think about that. There's $2 trillion, $1.5 to $2 trillion in the United States that gets flowed back and forth that you never have any account of. I looked it up. The cashless society in the United States is equal to the GDP of India. It's number 5 in the world if you just talk about the cashless. Now, having said that, in terms of PPP, which is purchasing power parity, PPP means purchasing power parity, what we find is that China is probably number one. And what that means is it's an economic term for measuring prices at different locations, okay? And so the whole purpose of the thought behind that is if there were no transaction costs or if there were no trade barriers for a given good, the price would always be the same no matter where it was. And of course it isn't, all right? But spit it out, the purchasing power parity basically states that you can buy more with dollars in China. I don't think this will hold for a decade. And the reason that I don't think that is quite simply is there's a growing middle kind of class in China that has been very slowly growing that I think will have a rapid growth in the next decade or so. And you're going to find that with many more individuals, with 1 billion consumers that the Chinese have, is it quite simply there'll be fewer goods. And I think even China will be hard pressed to make enough goods for their own people. And so I think we might see a kind of a turnaround here when that happens, okay? So the last group is the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And these are emerging markets, and they are adopting more modern marketing strategies, and they have a growing middle class. And so what you're seeing is you're seeing this growth coming about, and we're going to see the beginnings of what we'd say is a burgeoning or a very growing and successful kind of market going out there. Let me also say what this slide does not talk about is it doesn't talk about Eastern Europe. And at the time of the making of this book, I think it did not state sufficiently the market power of Poland and Romania and the Czech Republic and those Eastern European, which used to be in the Soviet bloc, which are now having marketing economies or what I would say is capitalist marketing economies. And I would say, especially with the products that you find coming out of Eastern Europe now, are some of the finest ever made. The finest transmissions that are made for vehicles in the United States are in a section of what used to be called East Germany, and then also where you find in Poland and the Czech Republic as well. So along with that, basically what I'm saying is we're at a golden age when it comes to international trade. You know what? I'm looking at the clock. We don't have time to tackle some of the other things. So how about we all go and we'll all meet back at Thursday. I might, as of looking at it right now for what I have to cover, I might push back the test from Tuesday to Thursday next week. I'm having that opinion come right now because I think I have enough to cover here. And I know it'd break your heart to come back on Tuesday. So yeah, I'll tell you what, we may do the test next Thursday. As a matter of fact, I can't just say it. We'll do the test next Thursday, okay? Okay, folks. Well, look, we're done for the day. I'll talk at you later, and y'all have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.